Witajcie polscy widzowie programu ex-ADS. Ze mną jest Steve Daly, autor już teraz bardzo popularnej książki, może tak będzie lepiej widać, tak, Ellen White, A Psychobiography, czyli psychobiografia Ellen White. Książka, która stała się dosyć bardzo popularna, przyniosła popularność Steve'owi, ale dzisiaj nie będziemy mówić o tej książce, powiemy o innej książce Steve'a. Natomiast jeżeli byście chcieli wiedzieć, kim jest Steve Daly, pozwólcie, że wam powiem. Steve Daly jest licencjonowanym psychologiem i historykiem Kościoła, który przez 24 lata wykładał na uniwersytetach Loma Linda i La Sierra University w Kalifornii. Uczył tam religii, historii Kościoła oraz psychologii. Przez ostatnie 10 lat pracował na Uniwersytecie Kalifornijskim w Los Angeles jako psycholog i specjalista terapii uzależnień. Jego praca magisterska z historii, napisana na Uniwersytecie Loma Linda, oraz rozprawy doktorskie z historii Kościoła, pisane w Claremont, czy psychologii na Uniwersytecie Alliant, skupiały się głównie wokół postaci Ellen White i adwentyzmu Dnia Siódmego. Jest on założycielem Keys Family Resource Center, a także Graceway Community Church w Riverside w Kalifornii. Jest żonaty, jego żona Erlis, z którą ma od 45 lat, są razem małżeństwem, mają 3 dzieci. Rozumiem, że teraz już jest więcej lat w małżeństwie Steve i Erlis, ponieważ minęło 3 lata od publikacji jego psychobiografii. Mają 3 dzieci, a także 6 wnucząt. So, after the Polish introduction, now I can say hello to Steve. Hi Steve, how are you doing?
Hi, Damian. Thank you for the invitation, and hi to the people of Poland.
Oh yes, yeah, it's a great opportunity for Polish community, not only for Polish Adventists but also for Polish evangelicals to know some amazing facts.
Yes.
You know, I just relate to amazing facts of Dutch Bachelor now.
The true amazing.
But those facts are really amazing and true, and well documented in your books, because we want to talk about especially of your new upcoming book, but of course I will also ask you about your other book, Ellen G. White Psychobiography. So if we can just start the interview, I will ask you the first question. What is your personal story with Seventh-day Adventism in few words?
Yeah, I'll try to do it in a nutshell. I grew up in a Seventh-day Adventist home. My mom was more Adventist than my dad. My dad kind of came from a backslidden Adventist background. And, my mom told him, if you're going to marry me, you have to get baptized. And so he liked to joke that he had a shotgun baptism the day before their wedding. But he wasn't a strong Adventist, especially when I was young. And he loved sports. He had been planning on becoming a professional athlete, but having a baby kind of cramped his style. So he was working as a physical therapist. But, he put me in public school instead of Adventist schools. I love sports too. So I was very close to my dad as a little kid. And my mom was pushing for all 3 of us boys. I was the oldest, but there were 2 after me fairly close. And she wanted us all in Adventist schools because she came from the more conservative Adventist home. And that did not make me happy when I got transferred to Adventist schools in junior high, because they had no sports program at all. And I had been doing very well in the sports programs in public schools. So I kind of went into a period of rebellion where I was quite upset about what was going on. And this continued on till the age of 16, when I had a very powerful encounter with God that told me that God was very real and that he loved me in spite of how screwed up I was. And I realized that was a very different God than what I'd been taught about in Adventism. So, I went to boarding school the next year, and that was Real Endo Academy. It was like super conservative, very perfectionistic teachers. And I realized, this religion's pretty messed up. I want to go into the ministry to try to help it change in a positive way, so young people will be more attracted to it. And so that was my reason for going into the ministry. And Adventism was great to me. The Lord opened up all kinds of doors. I was called to La Sierra University to be the chaplain and campus pastor there when I was just in my 20s, one of the youngest, and was there for 20 years. Great opportunities, traveled all over the world. I wrote my book, Adventism for a New Generation, which did very, very well. It was used as a textbook in many Adventist colleges and universities. So generally speaking, I love my time in Adventism. Although from the beginning, I recognized that it had major problems. And I started attending John Wimber's Vineyard in 1985. And I was really ready to leave Adventism at that point. And John encouraged me to stay because I had a very influential position. And I prayed about it, and God convicted me to say, stay in Adventism till they get rid of you.
Okay, I see.
I stayed in trying to help the church change as long as I could. And my book was a very Christ-centered, spirit-led call to Adventism. And it did influence a lot of people, but the system itself resisted, even though I had a lot of big names in the church endorse the book, the system, the hardcore Adventist conservatism resisted it and opposed it and opposed me ultimately. And by 2010, I'd had enough. And we had a conference president that lied to our Celebration Center congregation directly, and several people said, we're leaving. Would you come with us and be our pastor? And I said, yes, I will. So in 2010, I started the Graceway Community Church, and we've been going ever since. Just a small church, but very close. The people really love each other, very loving church to new people who come in. And I was really putting Adventism away at that point. I went to work for UCLA as a psychologist. I became a licensed psychologist in 1992, which I'm very thankful for because it gave me options outside of Adventism. And I went to work for UCLA. I loved working with them and for them. And I had put Adventism in the rearview mirror until 2014. And that's when I found out about the hacking of the White estate, which actually occurred in 2012. But initially, they tried to blackmail the church. But when that didn't work, they started leaking things online. And in 2014, the White estate realized, hey, all this stuff's going to leak out that we've kept secret. We might as well just put it online ourselves. And we'll say that we're doing it in honor of Ellen White's 100th anniversary of her death in 2015. So, they lied about that. They tried to cover up what was really happening. But I saw all the stuff they'd withheld from me as a researcher, and I was very unhappy about that. Ellen White being addicted to alcohol, her hating children, a lot of things that came out through the hacking that I hadn't seen in my previous research. So I decided I better write another book. And, as a historian and a psychologist and pastor, I was qualified to write a psychobiography of Ellen White. And so I did that. And, things have been pretty hot and heavy since I wrote that book. But I love my time in Adventism. I don't have any hatred for the church or that kind of thing like people accuse me of. I just want to see it change in a positive way, and I want to try to reach out to people who've been hurt by Adventism and those who are still in Adventism who don't know what's going on.
Okay, great. I don't know if you noticed that, but I have an excellent T-shirt with baked bacon eggs.
Bacon. That is excellent.
Yeah.
I like turkey bacon.
Yeah. So I break the rules, which Ellen strongly promote in her books, but she also broke those rules. So I feel,
Absolutely.
yes, so I'm justified.
And James had a big porker they downed right after.
Yes, I know. Okay, so if we are talking about your psychobiography, so how is your life going as a scholar and as an author after this book?
Yeah, it certainly, I'd pretty much faded out of the scene of Adventism, and it put me back into that scene again in a way that seemed to be quite threatening to the church. They have tried to fight and resist and mainly tried to suppress the book. I've been on a whole bunch of programs, TV, radio, web programs, all over. And some of those have specifically challenged any Adventist scholar to come on and try to defend the church about what is documented in my psychobiography. Not a single scholar has been willing to come forward. They know that my stuff is accurate. They know that they can't deny the documentation in the psychobiography. So their strategy is to try to suppress it and or lie about it or lie about me. And so that's what they've done. I have responded to a couple of the book reviews they've written. Jonathan Butler wrote a book review in Spectrum, and Butler's a friend of mine, but he was pretty hostile in the review because he's writing a book on Ellen White, which if my book, is seen to be the truth, it will kind of make his book meaningless. So, basically, I wrote a response point for point to his review, and Spectrum refused to publish it, even on their website. They claimed, oh, we don't have enough room. But they wouldn't even publish it on their website. So, and this was with two different editors. So, even Butler was quite surprised by that. Spectrum is no longer the open journal that it used to be in Adventism. It's kissing up to the establishment now, and it has a bunch of people on its board that are, establishment Adventists. So they're kind of controlling the agenda. Adventist Today initially did an hour-long interview with me about the book, and they published it on their website, and it was drawing a lot of attention. And then Alden Thompson attacked it, and some of the old establishment types really started going crazy, and the board chair got pushed out. He had only been there for like 6 months, and they brought him in to bring in more young people to the readership, but they pushed him out. The CEO left. So AT really also had egg on their face. I was on their board for many, many years when I was in the Adventist Church, and they also censored my stuff way back in those days when President Garrity, they were meeting on the La Sierra campus, and when they had the core program come in there, I wrote several articles that the magazine asked me to write. They were totally documented, and right before they went to publication, Garrity told them, don't publish this, and it's like, well, we're on your campus, so we have to do what you say. But AT really compromised themselves badly too. I'm really disappointed in both AT and Spectrum because there's no longer an honest Adventist publication out there. There used to be Adventist Currents, and there were several different options, Evangelica. There were a lot of different competing groups that were speaking the truth, but now it came down to AT and Spectrum, and now neither one of them are really willing to speak the truth. So the Adventist establishment is certainly trying to resist me in every way they possibly can, and they failed to refute the evidence in my book, which overwhelmingly shows that Ellen White was grossly dishonest in many, many different ways, not just the plagiarism, which, got documented by Walter Ray in his book, but even Fred Veltman, who was one of my teachers at PUC, he documented the plagiarism, and he summed it up by saying that Ellen White's writings are derivative. They're not original. Even when she's not directly copying, she's taking her stuff and paraphrasing it from other authors. So I was really surprised they hired Veltman to do that, because he's a straight shooter. And I know they weren't happy with his conclusions. That's why they didn't publish them to the church or make them available to the church. They did a short summary in Ministry magazine and tried to bury the thing. But the Adventist Church, they've just been dishonest from the get-go, and both during and after Ellen White's life, they've had to cover up for her. And it's quite tragic. The 1919 Bible Conference was really the crucial attempt to come clean and address the dishonesty, and that got wiped out. The leaders all got put out of the church who led out in that conference, and from that point on, those were the dark ages of Adventism, from 1920 to 1950. It was just absolute domination of apologists, Ellen White's God, perfectionism. It was just as bad as it gets in Adventism for that 30-year period. F.D. Nickel was the big hero, the super apologist. But I really encourage people to read the psychobiography first before they read the White Estate Fraud, because the White Estate Fraud makes so much more sense. And I do summarize a lot of things from the psychobiography in the White Estate Fraud. But if they read the psychobiography first, they will really have a great background for understanding why Arthur White did what he did.
Okay, so what is your new book about, and how it is related to psychobiography?
Yeah, the psychobiography, of course, documents Ellen's dishonesty from the get-go, that even early on she was plagiarizing. Even early on in her life, she was being grossly dishonest. Before she ever even came into the Adventist movement. And she was also off into this crazy charismatic stuff that was extreme. We're talking extreme. And then, of course, she later denied that, even though it's fully documented. So if you study and trace Ellen White's life, it's whole lifetime patterns of dishonesty that benefited her at every stage. And that continued right on when she was 17 years old and had her first vision that she really borrowed or plagiarized from Joseph Turner, which is the first vision recorded in the Adventist movement from her. And that, was a stupid vision. She was just taking what Joseph Turner was saying about the shut door, that only their tiny little group was the only one that could be saved. The whole rest of the world was lost. That God showed her the specific day and hour of his coming. I mean, how stupid was that? She said a lot of things in that vision that were ridiculous, but she was just taking what Joseph Turner had written. And, then when it all proved to be false, then she came up with a bunch of more visions where she did specific date setting in 1845. And her whole pattern through her life was one of dishonesty, plagiarism, manipulating people, exploiting people, telling people to sell their homes and their property and give all the money to her and James because they were controlling the money of the church. They got much more wealthier. They started out in extreme poverty, but they became wealthy very rapidly as they were taking these monies and using them to buy homes for themselves, while they're telling others through vision to sell their homes and give them the money. It's just a really tragic thing that when you study decade by decade, you have to just shake your head and say, this woman is the most successful plagiarist in history. There's never been any other plagiarist who comes close to being as successful in his or her dishonesty is what Ellen White was. And then she builds this whole mythological thing about how she gets these incredible downloads from God, that are detailed in every way, more than 2,000 detailed visions. So she comes to the point where whatever she wants to say, she attributes it to God, claims she saw it in vision, whether it's falsely accusing people or, it's just a very tragic life when you really study it carefully and come to realize what this woman got away with and how the church has covered for her even after her death. And so it's not really surprising in that light that her grandson her son and her grandson, who ran the White estate, were also dishonest. Willie was proven to be dishonest in a number of ways, but nothing compared to Arthur. Arthur took over for him in 1937, and he ran the White estate all the way to 1978. Even though he had no theological training, no historical training, he was an accountant who got put in the White estate for reasons of pure nepotism. And he always tried to claim that he was this objective scholar when it was the exact opposite. And what this latest book does is it shows that during these years, while he was in the White estate, he secretly met with Carrie Johnson for more than 20 years and basically ghost wrote the book, I Was Canwright's Secretary, knowing 100% that it was false, that Carrie Johnson never even met Canwright. They fabricated this entire book, made up all kinds of lies about Canwright, and then Carrie Johnson was sent out on the camp meeting circuit to tell even worse lies that they were afraid to put in the book. Initially, they were planning on putting all the lies in the book, but a man named Dowdy got in their way. Norman Dowdy, he wrote a true book about Canwright and D.M. Canwright on, his life. And basically, the case of D.M. Canwright scared Arthur White that if they put all the lies in that they were going to claim were based on Canwright's diary, they would be in big trouble, because Dowdy actually went to the White estate and insisted on being able to read the diary that they stole from Canwright's family. That's another story. Arthur White encouraged Carrie Johnson to befriend the Canwright family members. He knew there was a diary there. Tell them you loved Canwright and you want to do sympathetic, positive research about him. So she conned the family into letting her borrow the diary. She immediately stole it, took it to Arthur White. He put it in the White estate and would not allow anyone else to have access to it. And Dowdy wasn't even allowed to take notes or make any copies of anything when he read it. But that really kept, Dowdy made it clear that there was nothing in that diary that was detrimental or negative about Canwright. So the lies that they told about Canwright, Carrie Johnson claimed that when she was working for him, he was completely demon possessed and he would speak with demonic voices as he was dictating to her. All this stuff that was just 100% ridiculous lies, because Canwright was a dedicated Christian man, and yet Adventists have villainized him to be this pathetic, evil figure. So this book shows the true Canwright. It shows the true Arthur White, that he was 100% deceptive, a liar, and that we can't rely on his 6-volume biography of his grandmother at all, because he's 100% untrustworthy and willing to completely compromise the truth for expedient gain. And Carrie Johnson was also a proven liar. She was a thief. She was disfellowshipped from the Adventist Church for stealing money as a treasure. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in this White estate fraud that no Adventist has ever known before. And I never could have written the book without the help of Nancy Page and her brother Ted, because they were the only eyewitnesses to Arthur White coming and meeting in their home with their grandmother week after week after week for 20 years. And he kept this secret. He denied it when he was asked about if he knew her. If he was meeting with her, he completely denied it. So he just outright lied about this secret relationship that he had with Carrie Johnson, and that he was basically the one ghostwriting that book behind the scenes and telling her what to say. And so Norman Dowdy, his book was extremely helpful to me, and so were Nancy Page and her brother Ted. Without those three people, I would have never written this book. But with those three people, the book is, and the extra research I did beyond them, the book is completely damning of Arthur White. You know, no one can take him seriously anymore after reading this book. And I'll be interested to see how the Adventist Church relates to the evidence when it comes out.
Yeah. For those who don't know, we are talking about The White Estate Fraud, Seventh-day Adventism Scandalous Untold Story by Steve Daly and with the help of Nancy Page. Nancy, she is a granddaughter of Carrie Johnson,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
Okay.
and she and her brother lived with her grandma, so they saw Arthur White come to the home and meet with her repeatedly.
Okay. Did they listen to those, conversations between Carrie and Arthur or not?
I mean, to some degree they did, but
Mhm.
generally speaking, they, Arthur and Carrie were off in another room. Nancy does talk about as she got older, especially things she overheard about Arthur telling her, fix this, do this, write this. He was clearly directing her and telling her what to do. And they both commented that Arthur was always sweating like mad when he was in the home. Probably very worried that someone would see that he was there, someone would document what he was doing. But, he was clearly nervous and uncomfortable, even meeting with her in her own home. So for good reason, because what he was doing was so unethical. It was so dishonest. It was character assassination at the worst possible level, where you steal a person's diary, lie about it, and then try to destroy their reputation. That's just, ridiculous stuff, especially for a professed Christian, quote, scholar to be doing.
Right. So maybe organize some informations. Who was Dudley Conrad, and why, this person is so threatening to SDA Church, and why Arthur and Carrie Johnson secretly, want to did their character
Destroy it.
assassination?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Arthur White knew Canwright was by far the most influential critic against his grandmother, even when he was helping Carrie write this book. Right up until the 1970s, the most effective critic against Ellen White by far was Dudley Canwright. He was recruited by James and Ellen as a young man. They brought him into their own home. They nurtured him. They saw that he had tremendous academic potential. And, they were very good at spotting young men who were very smart and very gifted and bringing them. They did the same thing with Kellogg. But that was the two-edged sword. They were able to have a great influence on Canwright, but he was also able to see what was going on in their own home. And he saw firsthand a lot of things that other people didn't see because he lived with them. And so he knew all about their marriage. He knew all about their dishonesty. He knew all about how they took old books that had been discarded that they owned personally, that were just sitting to throw in the trash. And they came up with a plan to, hey, let's send these books out to the mission field and have all the church members pay for that. And we'll get the money personally because we own them. So they made a ton of money off this plan. And then Ellen White's having all these visions say, oh, you have to buy these books. God's showing you have to buy these books because the mission field needs these books so much. And Canwright saw this whole thing, how they were swindling church members and there's just a whole bunch of this kind of stuff that he knew. So Canright was really very conflicted. He owed a lot to the whites. They had recruited him. They had given him opportunities. One reason he rose so quickly in the Adventist ministry was because of the whites' influence. So on the one hand, he really loved the whites and felt indebted to them. On the other hand, he had inside information about how dishonest they were, how evil they were, how much they couldn't even get along with each other, how absolutely mean and cruel they were to other workers. He documented all this stuff. Plus, Canright was considered the best debater in the entire Seventh-day Adventist Church. Whenever Miles Grant was this big critic of the church before Canright, and they would have Canright debate Miles Grant, because Canright was considered the best minister, debater, scholar in the Adventist Church. So Canright, when he wrote his two books, Seventh-day Adventism Renounced and The Life of Ellen G. White, those two books became by far the most powerful books critiquing Ellen White and the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And the last one on Ellen White was written in 1919, 4 years after Ellen's death, and the same year that Canright passed away himself. But those two books were being used by evangelical churches all over the world to denounce Seventh-day Adventism as a cult, right up until the 1970s, when Kerry Johnson's book came out. And then that kind of discredited Canright, and he no longer seemed to have much influence because of the lies that Adventists published about him. But what I'm doing is resurrecting Canright's reputation, showing he was true and honest. He was a very God-loving man, a humble man, nothing like what the Adventist Church misrepresented him to be. That Kerry Johnson was even worse than anyone ever thought, that Arthur White was way worse than anyone ever thought, that the White estate engaged in this terrible dishonesty all these years, and they've been dishonest in other ways, just like the hacking showed. But the Adventist Church itself promoted this book, and Adventist members gobbled it up. They were just so glad to hear the terrible, malicious things that were being said in the camp meetings by Kerry Johnson, and Arthur White traveled with her sometimes, and the two of them, would just trash Canright in every way they possibly could, because they could get away with a lot more speaking in public than they could putting something in print. So they didn't put the stuff about how Canright was demon possessed and all this stuff in the book, but they did talk about it when they were out in the camp meeting circuit. So, people were just gobbling this stuff up. Oh, how can anyone take Canright seriously? He was worshiping the devil, and the devil was speaking through him, and all this kind of stuff. So really very tragic when you think about it.
Okay, so there is some kind of asymmetry between the book and those camp meetings, right? When Kerry Johnson
Absolutely
spoke about.
In fact, that's still on the internet. If you look up Kerry Johnson speaking in camp meetings, they are still promoting this, and you hear her making these accusations about Canright being demon possessed right up to this day. After my book comes out, they'll probably be smart enough to take those interviews down, because it shows them to be the absolute frauds that they are.
Okay, so Kerry Johnson just started to, reveal her story with Canright. I think that Arthur White just, saw that it is a great opportunity to
Right.
bury the Canright, right? His
Absolutely.
reputation, and just use her.
Yeah.
In order to write the book.
Kerry Johnson was just a pawn, and she wasn't a very smart pawn either. She wasn't educated. She lied about everything in her life, her education, etc. Nancy talks about how her handwritten manuscripts of her book were absolutely worthless. There's no possible way she was a trained secretary, but she claimed to have this training as a secretary, which Nancy says is totally false, and there's no evidence to support anything that she puts in her book. And the funny thing was, she didn't even start coming up with any of these stories till 1950. You know, this is 31 years after Canwright's dead, and she'd never told anyone. No one in the family had ever heard it. This is a woman who's a complete sociopath. So if she had actually known Canwright and worked for him, she would have been bragging about it. And she claimed she was sworn to secrecy by Canwright. So she waited 31 years after his death. I don't know why you'd wait more than 1 year after his death, you know. But the reason she waited 31 years is because everyone she talks about in the book is dead. You know, the person that supposedly took her into the secretarial school. Everything you can check on is all can't be verified, because she's all attributing it to dead people. And that's why she waited so long. Plus, she was a total opportunist. And once I think she met Arthur White, she thought, hey, you know, she had lived in Battle Creek for a very short time, and she'd heard rumors about Canwright. So she came up with the bright idea, hey, why don't I take these rumors? Why don't I claim I was his secretary and see if Arthur White buys it? And of course, Arthur White did initially jump at the opportunity. This was a dream come true for him if he actually had Canwright's secretary to spill the beans against Canwright. So he was thrilled to death. But then when he starts meeting with her, you know, anyone with a brain would ask, why would it take 21 years to write a short little book? That's ridiculous. The reason it took 21 years was because as Arthur White was meeting with Carrie Johnson, trying to see if she was at all legit, he came to realize she's not at all legit. She's a liar. None of her stuff can be shown to be true in any way, shape, or form. So then he starts encouraging her to meet with Canwright's family, to befriend them, to get a hold of his diary. He realizes, hey, we got to get some information here that we can actually build your false story on. And the reason we know that that Arthur White knew she was a fraud was because she claimed that when she worked for Canwright, he had a peg leg. And she got this from some false information. It was a false rumor that had been spread about Canwright that actually applied to one of his relatives, that he'd lost his leg in his father's hayfield. And so Carrie bought this. So she's going around telling Canwright's own family that, yeah, I saw his peg leg. I knew he lost his leg in his father's hayfield. The whole family knew that was a complete lie. So at that point, they knew she was a fraud. And then Dowdy told them, no, she's actually coming from Seventh-day Adventist. So then they asked for the diary back, and that's when she'd already given it to Arthur White. So they went to the White estate and said, this is our property. And Arthur said, no. Dowdy wrote him all these letters. He said, no, it belongs to Carrie Johnson. I can't give it back to you. We're just keeping it safe for her. And then Carrie Johnson said, no, it belongs to the White estate. I can't do anything about it anymore. So Arthur and Carrie made up this plan where they would both lie and claim that the other owned the diary, so no one could get it back. And it's still in the White estate to this day. That's the kind of gross dishonesty that the church has practiced. And so Carrie Johnson was really a joke. I mean, she couldn't have written any book about anything. But Arthur saw the opportunity to manipulate her, to use her as a puppet, to use her as his pawn. So that's what I say, he ghost wrote the book. And it took 20 years because he had to cover for all her dishonesty, lies. They didn't put the stuff about the peg leg in the book because Arthur found out, oh, that wasn't true. She never even met Canwright. If she had met him, she would have known he didn't have a peg leg. So she never even met Canwright, much less worked for him. So she was just a complete liar, period, a pathological liar. And then Arthur White didn't want to lose his opportunity, so he still keeps writing the book, leaving out stuff that he knows are provable lies. And he just uses Carrie Johnson, but it takes him forever because there's so much cover up. There's so much research that has to be done about what she's lying about and what she isn't. And she was lying about just about everything. So most of the stuff in the book is just Arthur White putting in filler and then throwing in false rumors that Carrie made up about Canwright. But it's really sad, it's really pitiful that the Adventist Church bought this hook, line, and sinker. If either if either the Canwright family or Dowdy had the money to hire a good attorney, the Adventist Church could have been brought to their knees, because this was such a ridiculous case of defamation. It was such a provable case of fraud that they would have been sued for a ridiculous amount of money.
With the Canwright family, have they contacted you?
I've done some research on the Canwright family. I've been wanting to find some living members of the Canwright family that would at least read my book and give their feedback. Here's what I found, that there was only one Canwright that kind of had children and stuff, and there were 3 kids that are all very, very successful. They have nothing to do with Adventism. I think what's happened is these people have become extremely successful in their own worlds, and they don't give a rip about Adventism. They don't want to hear anything about Adventism. It's hard to even contact them because they're very, very successful people. So, I think the bottom line is they've put all that behind them, and they don't give a rip about Adventism because they have gotten the best revenge, success. They've lived very successful lives. They're very well-known people in their own right. And I have emailed them and stuff, but I haven't gotten any response. But I have been able to find out that these people are very successful. They're very hard to contact because they are so successful. And my guess is they're not responding either because they're not getting this stuff, or they just plain don't care about Adventism anymore. And why should they? They're very successful in their own lives, their own world. And they know their grandfather was successful in the sense that he had a whole main street of town named after him. And the Adventists claim, Ellen White's vision was that Canwright would die in obscurity, just another false vision by Ellen White, because Canwright's he's probably the most famous Adventist minister who's ever lived in history, because of all the languages his books have been translated into. And I mean, he's a very famous person outside Adventism as well as inside Adventism, but he's kind of seen as a Benedict Arnold inside Adventism because of all the lies. But my book is setting out to reverse those lies and show who the real liars were.
Okay. I'm asking about Connery's family because I remember that on the SDA Q&A, Peter Dixon's program, you admitted that you talked about some of the descendants of William Gage, right?
William Gage, yes, absolutely. He got grossly mistreated. He was the mayor of Battle Creek.
Yeah, some of the descendants, right? Of William Gage.
Yes.
Contacted, right?
One of William Gage's descendants wrote on a thread, came onto our thread when we were talking about William Gage, and talked about how the entire family had been really badly hurt, and they'd never been the same after the way Ellen White destroyed William Gage, and that this had affected all the generations since him, and it had been just a terrible, tragic thing for the whole family. And I was wondering if that had been the case with Canwright too. That's why I researched it, but I found that that wasn't the case with Canwright family. They went on, became very successful. They didn't let the Canwright situation hamper them. and they just put Adventism in the rearview mirror and forgot about it, basically.
Yeah, and she destroyed William Gage because of his involvement in political issues, right?
Yes, yes. William Gage was a devout follower of Ellen White and was very loyal to her. He was also in the temperance movement in Battle Creek, which Ellen White was very active in. Ellen White had written all these testimonies saying it's a sin to vote, it's a sin to be involved in politics in any way. So William Gage was aware of those things, and he didn't want to be involved in politics. But he was very influential in Battle Creek, and the temperance cause really wanted him to run for mayor. And he said, no, Ellen White says, but then people came to him and said, hey, but she's changed her mind. She's changed her tune. Now she says, you can not only vote, but vote even on the Sabbath day if you're voting for temperance. So, she changes 180 degrees. So they're trying to talk William Gage into running, and he finally concedes, and he wins by a landslide, and he's considered a great mayor. Ellen White becomes very jealous of him, just like with Kellogg. She couldn't stand any Adventist being better known or more prominent than her. So she just unfairly attacks Gage at all kinds of levels that I document in the psychobiography. And she was completely unfair to him. She completely made up lies, attributing them to God about Gage. She basically just destroyed Gage. And he was so devastated because he'd been a follower of hers that he didn't even try to fight back. He quit politics, he quit the ministry. He just basically got depressed, and the whole family suffered as a result, and the generations that followed him suffered as a result, which is quite interesting to hear from one of his descendants.
Okay, I see. So I think that your new upcoming book will be more harmful for SDA Church because you have the eyewitnesses of some facts. So my question is, what kind of reaction do you expect from Ellen White Estate and SDA Church in general after the release of your new book?
Yeah, I would say that, first of all, I'm kind of public enemy number one for them right now. It's really interesting how things work in Adventism. When Ron Numbers wrote his book, Prophetess of Health, the Adventist Church just totally attacked him. The scholars totally attacked him. They had a big issue of Spectrum that totally attacked him. Ron Grable from the White Estate went around saying he was the most irresponsible historian to ever write. And, they were just terrible what they did to Numbers. And then over the years, as Numbers left the Adventism completely and became a famous historian in his own right, and they saw that he wasn't going to attack the Adventist Church anymore, scholars kind of befriended him again. And when he died recently, they honored him. Butler got up and talked about how, even though he'd been part of putting Numbers off from the Adventist Heritage magazine, which he created himself, and Numbers held that against him for quite a while, that eventually Numbers and Butler became friends, and Butler spoke at his memorial service and said his book, Prophetess of Health, was the greatest historical book ever written in Adventism. And so you get all these accolades and people giving Numbers all this praise now that he's dead. I don't know if they'll ever do that to me or not, but for right now, I'm a present threat to them. And I'm a psychologist, I'm a historian, and I've been in the Adventist ministry for 35 years. So, I've written 28 books. So these people do not like me. And these last two books I've written are extremely threatening to the church. And the difference is that if you take down Ellen White, that takes down the very core of what Adventism is. So, their strategy with my psychobiography, he's just echoing Canwright. We've already discredited Canwright. That's kind of where they come from. But now they're not going to be able to say we've discredited Canwright because I've shown that they didn't discredit Canright, but they discredited themselves. And that, Arthur White, the whole 6-volume biography he wrote is nonsense. It's a pure lie, because he proved himself to be a total liar, colluding with Gary Johnson for 20 years to desecrate the memory of Canright. And there's a lot of people in Adventism that don't really like Arthur White. A lot of people knew he was kind of a jerk, snotty, thought he was cool, arrogant, sanctimonious. He was a liar. He was shown to be a liar in a lot of little things, even before I wrote this White Estate Fraud. But the White Estate Fraud just buries him. You can't come up from what the White Estate Fraud shows about him. He is just an absolute evil liar who's into character assassination of an innocent, godly man. I mean, you can't get much worse than what he did when he claims to be this objective scholar, and he wasn't even a scholar. But it'll be interesting to me. I think on the one hand, Adventists have already tried to suppress me and keep me out of the public eye as much as they possibly can. So they're going to continue that strategy to some extent. But then there's going to be other Adventists who say, hey, this is so damning for Arthur White, we have to admit it. We have to bury Arthur White, and we need to take away his honorary doctorate from Andrews, and all these accolades and awards the church gave him. Those should all be taken away because the man was an absolute fraud. And then it becomes so much easier to recognize, yes, he was a fraud, just like his grandmother. His grandmother was a fraud, and he was a fraud. And they're very much alike. They're both very sophisticated sociopaths. And so I don't know for sure what will happen. If Spectrum and AT had any decency at all, they would at least interview me about this book about Arthur White, because the evidence is indisputable. You can't read that book and say, oh no, that isn't true about Arthur White. No, it's impossible to defend Arthur White given the evidence in this book. So, the church can keep on being an ostrich and just keep its head in the sand and just keep denying and continue its deceptions. But there are people in Adventism that are really getting sick of the lies about Ellen White. And now that when they see all this stuff come out about the White Estate, which isn't particularly loved, and Arthur White, who wasn't particularly loved, it'll be quite interesting to see if there are Adventists who are willing to throw Arthur under the bus, because he deserves to be thrown under the bus.
Okay. Is it true that you're a hater of SDA Church who wants to make money for slandering this denomination?
Yeah, that's funny. They the two big things that Adventists like to say about me are, oh, he's just bitter, he's resentful, he hates Adventism, he's just trying to lash out and get revenge on Adventism and all this kind of stuff, which is 100% lie. As I said, I love my years in Adventism. I love trying to serve the church. I love trying to help the church change. I had no bitterness at all towards Adventism when I left Adventism. I just had come to realize Ellen White was a false prophet. And, the church's doctrines are not based on the Bible. They're based on a false understanding of Ellen's visions. And so it wasn't bitterness at all that caused me to leave. I just recognize Adventists are full of it when they claim to be the remnant and Ellen White claims to be the spirit of prophecy. It's just all lies. And I want to go on and live a productive life without dealing with this stuff. But the other thing that I write my book to make money is particularly funny, because I've written 28 books and I haven't kept a penny from one of those books. Every single penny that's been made from any of those books has gone to a nonprofit. It's called Better Living Ministries. And that's used for outreach, ministry. The money's been used to buy a church. our Graceway Community Church meets in a building that Better Living Ministries paid for from royalties to my books. And I never took a personal penny of that money for myself. My wife and I have been blessed. We don't need that money. So we are very glad for that money to go to the gospel, to go to build the kingdom of God. And it's funny that people are so ridiculous to make that accusation without doing any research at all, because I've stated many times that I don't personally take money from my books. And yet people just ignore that. They lie. They, it's irresponsible is what it is. And it's really funny when you compare me to Ellen White, because she fought for the highest possible royalties she could get on every book. And she was just plain greedy about the royalties on her books. But people want to say I'm greedy, but not Ellen White. It's the opposite. She was the one who made more than $3 million in our money today off the royalties to her books. Personal money for her. I haven't made 1 cent off any personal royalties for me, and yet they want to make this false accusation against me. I should sue the people for slander who say that, because it's just gross slander when they write stuff like that. But I got better things to do.
Okay, I see. I think that that question was important because I saw those, especially from our apologists. They always want to discredit your person. You are not your arguments, but your character and your motives and so on. So
absolutely.
So we are clear on that. Okay,
that's all they have. They have to make up lies because they can't refute the documentation. And even Butler and Tim, who wrote the reviews for Spectrum and the White Estate, never took on the major historical arguments in my book. And that's why I wrote my responses to both of them as appendixes in this coming book, The White Estate Fraud, because Spectrum and AT, they wouldn't publish those responses. So I'm putting them in print for good, since they wouldn't do it themselves.
Okay. Maybe I will translate some of excerpts of your responses to Tim and Butler in Polish, if you agree for that.
Yeah, the whole book there are 4 appendixes. The first one is a long interview with Nancy Page that I quote from a lot in the book. The second one is a short appendix from her brother Ted that documents or says the same thing that Nancy says, only in a shorter format. And then I have 2 fairly lengthy responses to Butler and to Tim. So those are the 4 appendixes in the book, and I think they're all very much worth reading.
Okay. So the last question, Steve, is an open question. Do you believe that SDA Church is reformable? Do Adventists have a real chances for a change from cult to Christian denomination?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I'm a God-loving person, God-believing person. I believe the Word of God in a Christ-centered, Spirit-led way. And the Bible says, with God, all things are possible. So I'm not going to say it's impossible. With God, all things are possible. I'm not exactly sure the Adventist Church will ever allow themselves to be with God in this kind of a way. But the establishment has so much to lose if it were ever honest. And the Adventist Church is so pluralistic today, very different than when I was growing up. Adventism was kind of monolithic in those days. But now you've got people who don't believe Jesus is God. You don't believe God's a personal being. There's a lot of people in Adventist academia that are just complete liberals to the extreme. They believe monotheism is evil. I saw all this stuff come onto our campus when they brought the core program in the late 90s. And it was unbelievable to me that an Adventist campus would be requiring freshman students to believe and read this stuff. And that's what they were teaching. So, and none of them got kicked out of the church. None of them got disciplined. None of them lost their positions. They did get rid of some of the administrators when the board finally came in and got rid of the core program. But my point is, you got these ridiculous conservative Adventists, that follow amazing facts on the one hand. Then you've got these ridiculous liberals who don't even believe in God, and they're all in the same bailiwick. And I think the establishment just says, hey, we don't care what people believe as long as they're paying us tithe. We just want to get that tithe money, because the Adventist church is in big trouble these days. They're having mass exodus of young people. The tithing is dropping way off. So anyone who pays tithe, we'll keep them in. I don't care what they believe. They can believe Satan is God. Ellen White wrote about his satanic majesty many times. So you can believe Satan is God as long as you pay his tithe. That's kind of where Adventism is coming from nowadays. And so, the chance that they would ever be honest, I mean, what would happen? What would happen if Ted Wilson got up and said, we're denouncing Ellen White. We're moving forward without Ellen White. They would lose so much of the third world. They would lose so many conservative Adventists, and those are tithe-paying people. It would be absolutely devastating to the denomination. And so, for all pragmatic, practical reasons, I can't ever see the Adventist Church trying to do what's right. They've always had a history of being expedient. I don't know if you're aware of their history in Nazi Germany, how they were the only church that Hitler never shut down. They compromised themselves to Hitler to the very end. He loved the Adventists because he was a vegetarian. He believed in the Adventist health message. He went to the Adventist hospital to be treated. So the Adventists were his favorite sons, as it were. And the Adventist Church never denounced him to the very end, even when he's committing mass genocide. And this has been true in Russia, South Africa, many, many places over the world where you've had a dictatorial, fascist type of government. Adventists have kissed up to the government rather than denouncing the government. The Adventist view seems to be, if you're not passing Sunday laws, we'll kiss up to you no matter what you say. And, that's just ridiculous when you stop and think about it. They're going to support genocide as long as there's not a Sunday law. So I see Adventists as being extremely expedient, extremely immoral in terms of how they function, extremely dishonest in terms of how the system functions. There are a lot of good people, a lot of God-loving people. We were just talking on the thread, the last day about there's God-loving people in the Adventist church, certainly. And one person said, well, a bad well can't produce good water. Or like Jesus said, a bad root can't produce good fruit. And that's true. And I totally agree with that Adventism is a bad well. It is a bad root. But God overcomes evil with good. So there are individuals in these, even Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, Adventist systems, that are God-loving people, and in spite of the cultic status of the group they happen to be part of, they love God, and they can be used by God's Spirit, even in a cultic setting. So I certainly believe there's a lot of great, honest Adventist people out there. I just believe that the system is really dishonest, and that it has an extreme dislikelihood of ever becoming honest. That's how I see it.
Okay. So I believe that we have a beautiful conclusion of this interview. I hope that it was a good time for you.
Yes, enjoyed it very much. Thank you, Damian, for inviting me. I've enjoyed the time.
I'm much more thankful to you for your time and for this opportunity to get informed Polish Adventists and Polish believers
Amen.
and non-believers about those facts about Arthur White, Carrie Johnson, and this whole story about the fraud of
Yes.
making a book which only, was aiming to assassinate of character of Conrad, of his reputation, right?
Really sad. Yes.
So yes, so maybe I will conclude just making a conclusion in Polish about your book and about the premiere of your book, because it will be 18th.
October 18. Yeah. October 18. It's supposed to become available in the bookstores.
Okay, so drodzy polscy znający angielski słuchacze, widzowie, książka doktora Daily'ego ukaże się 18 października. Możecie ją kupić na Amazonie między innymi. Myślę, że będzie dostępna w Polsce. Wszystkich z Was zachęcam do zakupu tej książki, która odkryje niezwykłą historię oszustwa, za jakim stał prominentny urzędnik Kościoła Adwentystów Dnia Siódmego i Instytutu Ellen White i sam wnuk Ellen White, Arthur White. Mam nadzieję, że książka się dobrze sprzeda, a Steve będzie mógł dzięki niej dotrzeć do wielu nieświadomych ludzi i uświadomić ich na temat tego, jak Kościół Adwentystów Dnia Siódmego potrafi być nieszczery i do jakich posunując się niemoralnych czynów. So, thank you, Steve, for this interview, for this opportunity. Okay.
Just encourage the people to go to my website, authorstevedaily.com. It's authorstevedaily.com. And that gives them a lot more information as they look at the different headings and stuff on the website.
Okay, I will add the link below the film on the YouTube, so don't worry. So
thanks, Damian. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right. God bless you.